Welcome back to the Life Well Led podcast. It is allergy season here in
Oh my
Texas.
gosh,
We are
yes.
itching, we are crying, we are sneezing.
It's bad.
Bear with us.
It's really bad.
As we talk about today's topic, which is values.
Oh, right. Yeah, let's go into it. So values. Tee us up.
Okay, so we talked about values in terms of boundaries. Knowing your values in order to set clear boundaries. We talked about values in terms of time management, and how important it is to align with your values so that you're prioritizing your time appropriately. So it just makes sense that we sort of dive into our values and understanding what they are and why they're important to us. And so really that's what this episode is going to be. We're going to define values, teach you how to identify your values, understand their importance, how to implement some systems around your values, and then see where we are from there. What is the definition of values?
So a quick Google search of values is actually a pretty good definition with some context. Values are individual, familial, social systems, societal beliefs that motivate people to act in one way or another. Now, that makes sense if you take it from the individual level. Your beliefs are dictated, influenced in this case by your family, how you grew up, the people you surround yourself with, um, society in general. I mean, all of those things determine what your values are in some way, shape, or form. But here's the thing, right? I mean, you can choose your values. It's easy to say, hey, I value, taking care of the environment, or I value contributions and charity, of taking care of my community. All of that is definitely explicit values, and they're good values. They're things that are admirable. But it's the values that are internal that really are what we're talking about in terms of things that you don't know necessarily off the top of your head, or you don't know because they subconsciously come up. And that's why it's important to not just have your external values that you state to everybody, but your, I don't want to say hidden values, but your internal values, right? Like that's really what we want to talk about here.
Yeah. So, really, your values are your guiding principles. Whether you're conscious or unconscious of your values, it doesn't matter. They're still influencing your decision, your behavior, the way you act every single day, and the way you expect other people to act or react. Those values are being constantly mirrored back to you in one way, shape, or form, whether they are actually being mirrored back to you, you're looking for those in things, or they're not, and it's causing you frustration and anxiety and misalignment with your values, and you're feeling this sort of uneasiness. So identifying your values is just so important. So let's talk about what our values are. Maybe let's just give some examples of what our values are. So Eric, what are some of the things that you value?
So let me caveat that by saying what values I had at one point and what values I chose to have, as I alluded to earlier. What I used to really value, and it took a long time, I mean, probably 29, 30 years old when I really realized what these values were, which is safety and security. Truth is, everybody has that value in some way, shape, or form, especially when things are very scary and your life's in danger, or you feel like you're in danger, or, life just gets really hard. For me, that was valued every day because I had a really hard time getting outside my comfort zone. I realized that that doesn't really get taken care of even by things with life that just there's no guarantee of safety and security unless you make it yourself. Relying on others for your safety and security is part of life, but it's not a guarantee either. So I traded those values in by taking them down a couple notches and really valuing now independence and freedom of choice. And because of that, I am able to really fulfill my safety and security values, because I'm able to choose how I dictate how I live, how I provide for myself, who I associate with, and what I do that really drives me every single day. The last one is one that's permeated throughout regardless of changes that I've been through in my life, and that's loyalty. Mm-hmm. And so I think that those three big ones right now would be independence, freedom of choice, and loyalty.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I've seen the progression through the safety and security and comfort, Eric, the one who really, you had some very, very particular things that you enjoyed that brought you comfort.
Mm-hmm.
Jersey Shore,
That
buttered bagels.
was
I mean,
no, not butter bagels.
unbuttered bagels. It took a
Plain
long
toast,
time.
plain toast. And then I became lactose intolerant. And I can't have buttered bagels without, unless it's plant butter. But
It's
no,
just
to your point, like there
cruel.
was shows that I would watch over and over and over again in bed or on my couch or whatever, and just not want to leave. Like, just you're in your comfort zone, and that's everybody. That's not just
Yeah.
me. But you know, the point is that if you have values that you're acting on that you don't like the value, and even though you're valuing it and you're acting on it, you do have a choice. Values are something you can trade in at any given point and get a new value for yourself. Now, it takes work to implement it, but you can at any given time trade in your value system.
Yeah. I think where our values really, really overlap. Well, we have quite a few because we've been together a long time, and sometimes I feel like we are becoming one person.
Yeah,
Just kidding.
that's
um,
true.
Loyalty.
Yes,
That's a big one where we overlap. I
absolutely.
think another one that we overlap obviously is leadership.
That's a good one too. Yeah, I would say leadership because of what we do, but also because of the principle of what we agree on in leadership, and that it is a servant's mentality, and that it's also something that anybody and everybody can do, and that it actually takes courage to do. And I agree. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And personal development. I mean, just
Mm-hmm.
everything that we do and we talk about and constantly wanting to become better people and growing ourselves, it's really made a difference. It's really, and it's a value, and it's something that we put a lot of time and effort into. Um, so I think those are some of the things we overlap. I think probably my two biggest values are trust
Mm-hmm.
and freedom.
Mm-hmm. No, I would agree with that. I mean, trust drives everything you do. You expect it from people. You are giving it at any given point from the very beginning. And freedom is, I mean, it's very generic, but it is true. You are somebody that truly values freedom professionally and personally. And I probably was influenced by that. That's why it drove me to be somebody who never thought that I ever hated freedom or thought, I don't understand it. It was just I didn't see it possible
Mm,
the way that you did. And so that's been big.
yeah. So I get a lot of folks, especially in the coaching realm, when I talk about values, and people are like, I don't know. I don't know what my values are. Of course, I value family, and I value friendship, and I value, these kind of generic things that we as humans are expected to value. But what truly drives you, makes you tick, makes you get up in the morning and you're expecting everyone around you to emulate in some sort of way? And so, Eric, what would you say to the person who has no idea what their values are?
Well, doing some introspective work is really how you're going to find out. I mean, sometimes it's just a case by case example and being consciously aware. If you value family, you state, I'm a family person, but somebody in your family really ticks you off because you trusted them to do something and they didn't do it. Which value is actually stronger for you internally? It might be trust. And that might be a shock to you. You might say, well, maybe that makes sense, or maybe it doesn't, because I say I value family, but somehow I'm putting family on the back burner because I value trust more. But there's a really good exercise. I think this is something we should give away
Yeah,
to the
we
audience.
do. We have a values worksheet,
Yeah.
and essentially it lists probably 50 or so of the most common values,
Mm-hmm.
and allows you to rate the value 1 through 10, 1 being not at all valued and 10 being extremely valued. And then also rate how you're acting on that value. So again, 1 through 10, not at all acting or extremely acting. It is fascinating to go through and side by side comparison of these columns and seeing
Mm-hmm.
what's really important to you and what you're acting on, and how those two numbers are either similar or different, and if they're different, why are they different?
Yeah, that's a big one. Think about it in two ways. One of which is you really value something, but you're not acting on it. Why aren't you acting on it? It's a really good introspective question. Vice versa. What if you don't value something and you're acting on that value anyways? Why are you doing that? That's huge. So that's really something to take into consideration. Hopefully, if you're interested, take advantage of it, do it, work through it, see what results that you get. And if you're starting to deviate by a decent amount, more than two or more points, then you really got to ask, like, why is this the case?
I think the most important part, though, about values is really being authentic.
Mm-hmm.
There is no judgment of what your values are, but it is really, really helpful for you to identify what your true values are as a human, separate from that societal and external values that Eric was talking about. And maybe even figuring out where your values used to be and where you are now. Mine have certainly shifted. Eric's have shifted.
Yep.
There's a lot of things that we value as 30-year-olds that we didn't at 20.
I mean, valuing health at 30 is different than valuing it at 20. I
Yeah.
mean, maybe not for everybody, but at some point, the older you get, the more you value health. And maybe that's a societal thing. Maybe that's something that is a personal journey. Maybe it's both, right? The more doctor's visits you go to, that might drive you to want to be more healthier. Maybe you just don't want to deal with it, right? It's scary. So, either way, that's an example.
Yeah. Social. I mean, at 20, you want to be with people. You want to be around people. You want to be in the party and part of that life, right? It's alluring at that age.
And
And
then at
at 30, you're
30,
like,
I want to go move in a farmstead and in the middle of the country and get away from people. No,
yeah, and I want
but
to go to bed at 8 and I want to get a
yeah,
good night's sleep and I
yeah.
want to wake up and make sure that my coffee and my breakfast is exactly the way that I want it because I value that more than I do going out at night and meeting new people.
A great example of one that I see is, a theme is in your 20s, you work hard, you grindstone, you value hard work, and you value pleasing others. By 30, you start to really not give a shit as much. And I mean that in a good way because you start to say, I know what I like, I know what I don't like, I'm not going to do this, I'm going to do that, and I'm not going to let people determine which way I want to go. Maybe it happens later in your life, but I start to see around 30 years old for people in my generation start to really have that kick in and dictate which way they want to go with their career.
Yeah. So, like we said, I mean, your values dictate your daily life and you incorporate them in your daily life. For me, sleep is really important.
Hmm.
I love my sleep and I need a certain amount of hours to sleep every night. And so I will gladly pass up on watching television, doing pretty much anything after 8 o'clock because I know that I need to go to bed. But I also value the 3 hours in the morning. I get up at 5 and
Hmm.
I value those 3 hours before anyone else gets up or before my day really starts to do my self-care, to eat a good breakfast, to go on a walk, to do the things that I want to do. Those 3 hours are my time. I value that time and I work it into my schedule because those things are important to me, and that solitude, that time where I can just reflect, is important to me. And so I have learned to build that into my life over the years. And so it really does. How does some of your values show up in your daily life, Eric?
Similarly, I think in the last year or so, I've started to do the same thing as you, and that is getting up early in the morning to have some time to myself and self develop. So I spend 5 or 6 in the morning, whatever hour I get up, because it deviates depending on how good a sleep I get. And I read. I like to read in the morning. I like now. I've always, that's another one. Gee, I just thought of that. It's like its own coaching session. I value the development of knowledge. I
Yeah.
love learning. So, I think that generationally speaking, we you can change it if you don't like this value, but I think millennials and maybe even Gen Z really value experiences over money, experiences over doing the work in the 9 to 5 realm. So when it comes to benefits and the business, you might be looking for time off to have an experience in life rather than having that multiple 6 figure salary. You might take a little bit of a pay cut just so you can have those hours off.
Hmm.
I mean, I don't know. That's just something that I personally would value in that regard because that's changed for me in the last 4 or 5 years.
Well, now that you open the door for leadership, let's just talk about the Gary V principle, which is that it really, values are on an individual level. And yes, there are generational values, right? Like millennials like this and boomers like this and zoomers like that. But at the end of the day, what as in the terms of leadership,
Hmm.
it's so important to get to know your team, every single person on your team, and what they value, because what Sally values at 25 is not what she values at 35, is not what she values at 40, right?
Yep.
One might be freedom and time off and vacation and traveling, and one might be money, and one might be time and flexibility with family, right? I mean, there's just, everybody has something else that makes them tick. And on a leadership platform, it's important to know your people.
No, that's exactly it. You have to know your people on an individual basis. You can be high up and have a broad stroke on how people are, but you're not really going to connect with them very well if you don't value, relationships, right?
But bringing it back to the individual, it's also important for Sally to know those things. It's not just
Oh,
important
yeah.
for me as Sally's manager to know those things, but it's important for Sally so that she can tell me and actually articulate what she wants and what she needs in her life in this moment. And that's about knowing thyself. That's self-awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And that is going back to identifying your values and being able to work them into your life. And again, Sally may not be, she may know that she loves to travel, but she doesn't realize why she wants to travel. She values adventure, she values experience, she values, the freedom that travel brings her. If Sally doesn't have the money to travel, how else can Sally create freedom and adventure in her life without necessarily having to travel abroad for 3 months?
Yeah,
Right?
finding
That's the
out.
kind of stuff we're talking about. How do you bring those values into your everyday life, and so that you're feeling fulfilled and aligned with who you are and where you are right now in today?
So let's help with that. We have a handout PDF that
Yeah.
you can download and have access to help you identify what those intrinsic values are. Because you're talking of, and you had a great example, Karen, like I value travel to Europe all the time. Well, what is it that brings you to that value? Is it adventure? Is it exploration? Is it, wanderlust? So whatever that core value is, and then how do you access that without necessarily always going to Europe because it's very expensive? But yeah, to your point, that's universal. So let's provide that, and I'd love to hear from people how their values and their actions either line up really well or what doesn't line up very well.
There's this quote that I absolutely love. I'm going to read.
Go for it.
Your beliefs become your thoughts become your words become your actions, and your actions become your habits, and your habits become your values, and your values become your destiny.
Wow.
And that's a Gandhi quote.
Love it.
I just think it is so incredibly powerful when we're able to tap into the values that we have, align ourselves, our systems, our boundaries, our time with those values so that we are fully aligned with ourselves and what our purpose is here in this moment. And we're feeling that joy and fulfillment we get from alignment and purpose.
So here's a recap. What are your values? Identify them. Start to dig and introspectively look at what your internal intrinsic values are. Are you acting on them? Are you acting on values you don't value now? And then decide from there what values you want to act on, what values you don't want to act on, and what values that you want to keep as your top values. You do have a choice.